Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's explore the essence of women's rights in Islam by first understanding what rights truly entail. Women's rights are not limited to a single dimension, but encompass a wide spectrum of life's aspects. These include personal freedoms, social dignity, access to education, financial independence, legal entitlements, and spiritual fulfillment. Critics often paint a grim picture of women's rights in Islam, portraying them as restrictive and oppressive. However, this perception is frequently rooted in misunderstandings, misrepresentations, and conflating Islamic teachings with cultural practices that contradict them. To appreciate what Islam offers women, we must step back and examine the context. In pre-Islamic Arabia, women were treated as commodities with little to no rights. They were deprived of inheritance, considered possessions, and subjected to practices like female infanticide. The arrival of Islam marked a paradigm shift. It recognized women's inherent worth and restored their dignity. Far from being an afterthought, their rights were codified in the Quran and exemplified in the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Islam emphasizes the equality of men and women in terms of their humanity and spiritual accountability. The Quran declares, "Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you." Surah Al-Hujurat 49:13. This verse underscores that merit is based on righteousness and not gender, race, or wealth. Furthermore, women's right to be educated is not just permitted, but is a religious obligation. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim, leaving no room for gender discrimination in the pursuit of learning." Islam grants women financial independence, a revolutionary concept for its time. Women have the right to earn, own, and manage their property without interference, even after marriage. This right was a stark contrast to other societies, where women were often financially dependent on male relatives. Additionally, Islam afforded women inheritance rights, as highlighted in Surah An-Nisa, which carefully outlines inheritance shares for men and women. Though these shares differ based on family structure and financial responsibilities, women's right to inherit was a groundbreaking provision in a world that denied them this basic entitlement. Understanding women's rights in Islam means acknowledging that Islam values the full scope of a woman's life. It recognizes her contributions as a daughter, wife, mother, and member of society, ensuring that she is honored and protected in each role. These rights are neither superficial nor ceremonial. They are rooted in justice, equality, and compassion. When examining these rights, one realizes that they are not just about freedoms, but about creating a balanced society where all individuals, regardless of gender, thrive in harmony. Islam's approach to women's rights is deeply rooted in the idea of balance and mutual responsibility. This balance ensures that rights are paired with responsibilities, not as a burden, but as a framework to maintain societal harmony. For instance, while Islam grants men certain financial obligations, like providing for the family, women retain their wealth entirely for their own use. A woman can choose to contribute to the household financially, but it is neither expected nor required of her. This financial independence safeguards her dignity and autonomy in a way that was unprecedented in history and is still remarkable today. Another key aspect of women's rights in Islam is their role in decision-making. Women in Islamic history have played critical roles in shaping communities, making strategic decisions, and even advising leaders. The example of Khadija bint Khuwaylid, R.A., the first wife of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, stands as a testament to the active and influential role women can play. She was not only a loving wife, but also a successful businesswoman who supported her husband emotionally and financially during the earliest days of his prophethood. Her contributions illustrate how Islam envisions a partnership where men and women work together for mutual success and the betterment of society. Social rights are another area where Islam ensures women are treated with fairness and respect. Women have the right to choose their spouse, a right that was groundbreaking in its time and remains significant today. The practice of forced marriages is a cultural issue, not an Islamic one, as Islam explicitly requires a woman's consent for her marriage to be valid. Furthermore, the right to divorce, often overlooked, is also enshrined in Islamic law. Women have access to various forms of divorce, ensuring they are not trapped in abusive or unhappy marriages. This provision highlights Islam's commitment to justice and fairness, even in personal relationships. Islam also emphasizes the importance of emotional and spiritual well-being. Women have the right to worship freely, attend religious gatherings, and engage in community activities. Spiritual equality between men and women is explicitly mentioned in the Quran, where Allah states, "Whoever does righteous deeds, whether male or female, while being a believer, those will enter paradise." Surah An-Nisa 4:124. This verse affirms that the ultimate measure of success in Islam is piety and righteousness, not gender. Despite these clear rights, misunderstandings often arise due to the gap between Islamic teachings and cultural practices. In some communities, cultural norms have overshadowed Islamic principles, leading to violations of women's rights. It is crucial to differentiate between what Islam prescribes and what is practiced in various societies. This distinction helps address misconceptions and sheds light on the true teachings of Islam, which aim to uplift and empower women. Islamic teachings on women's rights are not only comprehensive, but also timeless. They were revolutionary for their time and continue to provide guidance for modern societies. By addressing the physical, emotional, financial, and spiritual needs of women, Islam ensures that they are not only protected but also cherished as integral members of society. These rights are not concessions, but acknowledgments of women's inherent worth and dignity, as granted by Allah Himself. Islam's arrival in 7th century Arabia marked a transformative moment in human history, particularly in terms of social justice and the rights of marginalized groups, including women. To fully appreciate the revolutionary changes Islam introduced for women, it's essential to consider the pre-Islamic context, known as Jahiliyyah, a term that translates to ignorance. This era was characterized by widespread oppression and severe inequality. Women were subjected to a variety of injustices, and their value was often reduced to mere commodities in a patriarchal society. The Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, challenged these entrenched norms, introducing a framework that restored dignity, rights, and equality to women in a way that was unprecedented for its time. In pre-Islamic Arabia, women were treated as property rather than individuals with inherent worth. They were often bought and sold with no say over their lives or futures. Marriage was a transaction devoid of mutual consent, and women could be inherited against their will. Female infanticide, the act of burying baby girls alive, was a common practice driven by a societal preference for male children who were seen as providers and protectors. This gruesome practice epitomized the disregard for the sanctity of life and the inherent bias against females. The Quran categorically condemned such acts, stating, "When the female infant buried alive is asked for what crime she was killed." Surah At-Takwir 81-89. These verses not only condemned the act, but also served as a moral awakening, emphasizing accountability and the sanctity of every human life, regardless of gender. One of the most significant areas where Islam brought reform was in inheritance laws. In pre-Islamic Arabia, inheritance was entirely male-centric, with women excluded from receiving any portion of wealth or property. This exclusion left women vulnerable and reliant on male relatives for survival. Islam challenged this status quo by instituting laws that granted women a fixed share of inheritance. The Quran states, "To the male, a portion equal to that of 2 females." Surah An-Nisa 4:11. While some critique this division as unequal, it is essential to consider the broader social responsibilities of men and women in Islamic law. Men were obligated to provide for their families, including their wives, children, and extended relatives, whereas women had no such financial obligations. The inheritance laws were part of a comprehensive system designed to balance responsibilities and ensure the well-being of all members of society. The right to own property was another revolutionary change introduced by Islam. In pre-Islamic Arabia, women had no control over their earnings, possessions, or assets. They were entirely dependent on male guardians. Islam not only granted women the right to own and manage property, but also protected this right against any form of coercion or exploitation. Women could engage in trade, invest their wealth, and make independent financial decisions. Khadija bint Khuwaylid, the first wife of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, exemplifies this empowerment. As a successful businesswoman, she managed a thriving trade enterprise and employed the Prophet before their marriage. Her independence and respected status within her community highlight the practical application of Islamic principles that upheld women's autonomy. Education was another domain where Islam dramatically altered societal norms. In pre-Islamic Arabia, education was largely inaccessible to women, who were often confined to domestic roles. Islam, however, emphasized the importance of knowledge for both men and women. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, declared, "Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim." This inclusive statement left no room for gender-based discrimination in education. Aisha bint Abu Bakr, one of the Prophet's wives, became a renowned scholar and an authoritative source of Islamic jurisprudence and history. Her knowledge and contributions underscore the pivotal role that educated women played in the development of Islamic thought and society. Islam also redefined the concept of marriage, which in pre-Islamic Arabia was often exploitative and one-sided. Women had little to no say in choosing their spouses, and their consent was not considered necessary. Marriages were frequently arranged to serve the interests of male guardians or clans, with little regard for the bride's feelings or well-being. Islam transformed marriage into a partnership built on mutual consent, respect, and compassion. The Quran states, "And among his signs is this, that he created for you mates from among yourselves, that you may dwell in tranquility with them, and he has put love and mercy between your hearts." Surah Ar-Rum 30:21. This verse highlights the spiritual and emotional dimensions of marriage, emphasizing companionship and mutual care. The practice of dowry, or mahar, also underwent significant reform under Islamic law. In pre-Islamic Arabia, dowries were often paid to the bride's family, reinforcing the perception of women as commodities. Islam shifted this practice by mandating that the dowry be given directly to the bride as a gift and a form of financial security. The Quran states, "And give the women, upon marriage, their bridal gifts graciously." Surah An-Nisa 4:4. This change empowered women by providing them with financial independence and ensuring that their rights were prioritized in marital agreements. Islamic teachings also addressed the issue of polygamy, which was widespread in pre-Islamic Arabia and often involved unlimited and unregulated marriages. Women in such arrangements were frequently neglected or treated unfairly. The Quran limited polygamy to a maximum of 4 wives and introduced stringent conditions to ensure justice and equity. It states, "But if you fear that you will not be just, then marry only one." Surah An-Nisa 4:3. This restriction was a significant reform, emphasizing accountability and fairness in marital relationships. By setting these limitations, Islam sought to protect women from exploitation and ensure their rights were upheld. The role of women in spiritual and communal life also underwent a profound transformation with the advent of Islam. In pre-Islamic Arabia, women were often excluded from religious practices and communal decision-making. Islam, however, recognized the spiritual equality of men and women, as stated in the Quran. Indeed, the Muslim men and Muslim women, the believing men and believing women, Allah has prepared for them forgiveness and a great reward. Surah Al-Ahzab 33:35. This verse affirms that women have an equal standing in matters of faith and are equally entitled to seek Allah's mercy and reward. The inclusion of women in communal life was further demonstrated by the active roles they played during the Prophet's time. Women participated in battles as nurses, strategists, and even combatants when necessary. They engaged in trade, advised on matters of governance, and contributed to the intellectual and spiritual development of the Muslim community. These examples reflect the practical implementation of Islamic principles that valued and empowered women in all aspects of life. It is crucial to distinguish between the ideals of Islamic teachings and the cultural practices that often distort them. Many of the injustices faced by women in Muslim-majority societies today stem from cultural traditions rather than Islamic principles. Practices such as forced marriages, honor killings, and denial of education are antithetical to the core teachings of Islam. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, explicitly stated, "The most perfect of believers in faith are those who are best in manners, and the best of you are those who are best to their wives." This hadith underscores the importance of kindness, respect, and justice in treating women, reflecting the true spirit of Islam. By examining the historical context of pre-Islamic Arabia and the transformative changes brought about by Islam, it becomes evident that the religion was revolutionary in its approach to women's rights. The Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, established a framework that recognized women as equal participants in society, deserving of dignity, respect, and opportunities. These principles remain as relevant today as they were over 1,400 years ago, offering timeless guidance for building a just and equitable society. The emphasis on education in Islam, particularly for women, is not merely an incidental aspect of the religion, but a foundational principle that permeates Islamic teachings. The obligation to seek knowledge is rooted deeply in the Quran and Hadith, and these sources unequivocally affirm that the pursuit of education is a shared duty for both men and women. The centrality of this concept is evident from the very first word revealed in the Quran, Iqra, read. This command to read signifies the beginning of a transformation that Islam introduced in society, one that prioritized literacy, reflection, and intellectual engagement as pathways to understanding divine guidance and achieving a balanced life. The Quran does not specify that this command is restricted to men. Instead, it is a universal call to humanity, reflecting the egalitarian nature of Islamic teachings. In the context of women, the significance of this obligation cannot be overstated, particularly given the socio-historical conditions prevailing during the time of Islam's revelation. In pre-Islamic Arabia, women were often denied basic rights, let alone access to education. They were frequently treated as property, subjected to systemic discrimination, and deprived of opportunities for personal and intellectual growth. Islam's arrival radically transformed these norms. By asserting the inherent dignity and worth of women as equal creations of Allah, Islam laid the groundwork for a society in which women could not only access education, but also thrive as scholars, teachers, and leaders in their own right. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, actively implemented this principle throughout his life. He not only taught women directly, but also encouraged them to participate in discussions and seek knowledge. One of the most striking examples of this is the role of Aisha bint Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with her, one of the Prophet's wives and a towering figure in Islamic history. Aisha's intellectual contributions were unparalleled. She was a scholar of Quranic exegesis, hadith, and Islamic jurisprudence. Her mastery of these subjects was so extensive that even senior male companions of the Prophet would seek her counsel on matters of religion and law. This dynamic underscores the Islamic principle that knowledge is not gendered. Wisdom and understanding are gifts from Allah that are accessible to all who strive for them. Aisha's legacy as a scholar highlights another critical dimension of Islam's approach to women's education: the recognition of women as active participants in the transmission and development of knowledge. Women were not only recipients of education, but also its custodians and disseminators. This is evident in the fact that many of the Prophet's sayings and practices have been preserved through the narrations of female companions. The Hadith literature, a cornerstone of Islamic scholarship, owes much to the meticulous efforts of women like Aisha and Salama, who played instrumental roles in ensuring the accurate transmission of the Prophet's teachings. Beyond individual figures like Aisha, Islamic history is replete with examples of women who excelled in various fields of knowledge. In the early Islamic period, women's participation in scholarly activities was not an anomaly, but a norm. Educational institutions and informal learning circles welcomed women, and their contributions were recognized and respected. Fatima al-Fihri, for instance, founded the University of Al-Qarawiyyin in Fez, Morocco, in 859 CE. This institution, recognized as the world's oldest continuously operating university, served as a center of learning for both men and women. Fatima's vision and dedication to education exemplify the empowerment that Islam provides to women, enabling them to play pivotal roles in the intellectual and cultural development of their societies. The emphasis on women's education in Islam extends beyond formal institutions. It encompasses the broader concept of tarbiyah, or holistic development, which includes moral, spiritual, and intellectual growth. Islam recognizes that education is not confined to the acquisition of worldly knowledge, but also encompasses understanding one's purpose in life, cultivating good character, and strengthening one's relationship with Allah. This comprehensive approach to education is particularly significant for women, as it equips them to fulfill their multifaceted roles as individuals, family members, and contributors to society. An educated woman is empowered to assert her rights, understand her responsibilities, and contribute meaningfully to the betterment of her community. For instance, knowledge of Islamic jurisprudence enables women to understand their rights to inheritance, financial independence, and fair treatment within the family. This understanding is crucial in challenging cultural practices that may conflict with Islamic principles and advocating for justice and equity in accordance with the teachings of the Quran and Sunnah. The spiritual dimension of education is another critical aspect of Islam's approach to women's empowerment. The Quran frequently calls upon believers to reflect, ponder, and seek understanding as a means of strengthening their faith. For women, this intellectual engagement is not only a right, but also a form of worship. By pursuing knowledge, women fulfill their obligation to deepen their understanding of Allah's creation and their role within it. This spiritual empowerment has profound implications, fostering a sense of purpose, confidence, and resilience that transcends societal challenges and limitations. In addition to spiritual and intellectual empowerment, education provides women with the tools to achieve social and economic independence. Historically, Muslim women have excelled in fields such as medicine, astronomy, literature, and theology, contributing to the advancement of human knowledge. Figures like Lubna of Cordoba, a mathematician and librarian in Andalusia, and Maryam al-Asturlabi, an astronomer who made significant contributions to the development of astrolabes, exemplify the rich legacy of female scholarship in the Islamic world. These women were not exceptions, but products of a culture that valued and nurtured intellectual pursuits for all its members. The role of women as educators is equally significant. In Islam, the family is considered the cornerstone of society, and the role of the mother is particularly esteemed. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Paradise lies at the feet of mothers," highlighting the profound influence that mothers have in shaping the moral and spiritual character of their children. An educated mother is better equipped to fulfill this responsibility, imparting not only knowledge, but also values such as compassion, integrity, and a love for learning. This generational transmission of knowledge and values is essential for the development of a just and enlightened society. Despite the clear emphasis on women's education in Islamic teachings, challenges remain. In some parts of the world, cultural practices, socioeconomic factors, and systemic inequalities hinder women's access to education. These barriers often stem from a misinterpretation or misapplication of Islamic principles rather than the principles themselves. As such, it is incumbent upon Muslim communities to reaffirm and uphold the Quranic injunctions that mandate education for all, and to address the structural and cultural obstacles that prevent women from realizing their full potential. The modern era offers unprecedented opportunities for women to access education and contribute to various fields of knowledge. From scientists and engineers to writers and activists, Muslim women around the world are breaking barriers and challenging stereotypes. Their achievements serve as a testament to the enduring relevance of Islam's emphasis on education and its transformative impact on individuals and societies alike. The legacy of women's education in Islam is a powerful reminder of the religion's commitment to justice, equity, and intellectual growth. By empowering women with knowledge, Islam not only enhances their individual lives, but also strengthens the moral, social, and intellectual fabric of society. Through education, women are able to fulfill their roles as active participants in the pursuit of truth, the dissemination of knowledge, and the realization of a just and harmonious world. By recognizing and celebrating this legacy, Muslim communities can draw inspiration to continue the work of ensuring that all members of society, regardless of gender, have access to the opportunities and resources they need to thrive. In doing so, they honor the divine command to seek knowledge and uphold the principles of justice and equity that lie at the heart of Islam. The topic of modesty in Islam and its practical application, particularly through the wearing of the hijab, often sparks widespread debate and misunderstandings. To address these concerns thoroughly, we need to unpack the concept of modesty as it is presented in Islamic teachings, delve into the hijab's significance, and explore its role in shaping the identities and experiences of Muslim women. This exploration must also take into account the societal and cultural context that influence perceptions of modesty. Modesty in Islam is a holistic concept that applies to all aspects of a Muslim's life. It is not confined to clothing or outward appearance, but extends to behavior, speech, and even thoughts. Both men and women are called upon to embody modesty in their interactions with others. The Quran explicitly addresses this in Surah An-Nur, where Allah commands believing men and women to lower their gazes and guard their chastity. The emphasis here is on mutual responsibility, demonstrating that modesty is not a one-sided obligation. By encouraging restraint and self-respect, Islam seeks to create a society where interactions are based on respect rather than exploitation. The hijab, as a manifestation of modesty, is often misunderstood. Critics sometimes view it as a symbol of oppression or an imposition on women, but this perspective fails to consider the spiritual and personal dimensions of the hijab. For many Muslim women, the hijab is an expression of their faith and devotion to Allah. It represents their commitment to living by Islamic principles and serves as a reminder of their inner strength and identity. Far from being a restriction, it is seen by those who wear it as a liberation from societal pressures to conform to certain beauty standards. When discussing the hijab, it is essential to differentiate between the teachings of Islam and the cultural practices of Muslim-majority societies. In Islam, the hijab is part of a broader framework of modesty and is prescribed in a way that empowers women to make their own choices about how they present themselves. Unfortunately, in some cultures, the hijab is enforced in ways that contradict the spirit of Islam. Such practices are not rooted in Islamic principles, but are rather a reflection of patriarchal norms that have crept into certain societies. It is crucial to address this distinction to avoid conflating cultural practices with religious obligations. The Quranic verses that address women's dress code do so in a manner that respects their autonomy and dignity. Surah An-Nur 24:31 advises believing women to draw their veils over their bosoms and to not display their adornment except that which necessarily appears thereof. Similarly, Surah Al-Ahzab 33:59 instructs the Prophet, peace be upon him, to tell his wives, daughters, and the believing women to draw their cloaks over themselves when going out. These instructions are aimed at protecting women from harm and ensuring their safety in society. However, the manner in which these guidelines are implemented varies widely among individuals and cultures. An often overlooked aspect of the hijab is the sense of empowerment it provides to women. By wearing the hijab, many Muslim women feel that they are reclaiming control over their bodies and rejecting societal expectations that prioritize physical appearance over intellect and character. The hijab shifts the focus from a woman's external beauty to her inner qualities, fostering a sense of self-worth that is rooted in faith and personal integrity. This perspective challenges the narrative that the hijab is inherently oppressive and highlights the agency of Muslim women in choosing how to practice their faith. The spiritual dimension of the hijab is deeply significant for those who wear it. For many, it is a form of worship and a means of drawing closer to Allah. The decision to wear the hijab often stems from a personal journey of faith and understanding. This journey may involve studying the Quran and Hadith, reflecting on one's relationship with Allah, and seeking guidance through prayer. The hijab becomes a tangible expression of a woman's submission to her Creator and her desire to align her life with Islamic values. It is also important to acknowledge the challenges that Muslim women may face when wearing the hijab, especially in non-Muslim majority countries. In some cases, they encounter discrimination, prejudice, or even hostility because of their choice to wear the hijab. These experiences can be deeply painful and may require immense courage and resilience. Despite these challenges, many Muslim women continue to wear the hijab as an affirmation of their faith and identity, refusing to compromise their beliefs in the face of adversity. The broader societal impact of the hijab is another critical aspect to consider. By promoting modesty and reducing the emphasis on physical appearance, the hijab contributes to a culture of respect and dignity. It challenges the objectification of women and encourages people to value others based on their character and actions rather than their looks. This shift in perspective can have far-reaching effects on social interactions and relationships, fostering an environment where individuals are treated with respect and kindness. While the hijab is often the focus of discussions about modesty in Islam, it is just one component of a larger framework. Modesty encompasses a wide range of behaviors and attitudes, including humility, kindness, and self-control. For example, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, emphasized the importance of modest speech, advising Muslims to speak kindly and avoid gossip or slander. This holistic approach to modesty reflects the comprehensive nature of Islamic teachings, which aim to nurture both the individual and the community. In addressing misconceptions about the hijab, it is essential to amplify the voices of Muslim women who wear it. Their experiences and perspectives provide invaluable insights into the true meaning and significance of the hijab. By listening to their stories, we can gain a deeper understanding of how the hijab empowers them and how it fits into their lives as a source of strength and identity. These narratives also challenge stereotypes and help to dispel misunderstandings about Islam and Muslim women. Ultimately, the hijab is a deeply personal choice that reflects a woman's relationship with Allah and her understanding of Islamic teachings. It is not for others to impose or judge, but rather for each individual to decide based on their own faith and conviction. This respect for individual agency is a cornerstone of Islam and underscores the importance of sincerity and intention in acts of worship. The topic of modesty and the hijab is a profound and multifaceted one that requires careful consideration and thoughtful discussion. By examining the Islamic teachings on modesty, understanding the cultural context that influence perceptions of the hijab, and listening to the voices of Muslim women, we can gain a more accurate and nuanced understanding of this important aspect of Islam. Through this exploration, it becomes clear that the hijab is not a symbol of oppression, but rather a testament to the strength, faith, and dignity of Muslim women who choose to wear it. Marriage in Islam is a sacred bond, founded upon love, mercy, and mutual respect. It is not merely a social contract, but an act of worship, intended to establish a partnership where both spouses support and protect each other. The Quran describes this relationship beautifully. They are clothing for you, and you are clothing for them. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:187. This verse emphasizes the intimacy, care, and essential role that spouses play in each other's lives, much like garments that protect, adorn, and offer comfort. One of the most empowering aspects of marriage in Islam is the emphasis on mutual consent. A woman cannot be forced into a marriage against her will. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, made it clear when a woman approached him, complaining that her father had married her off without her consent. The Prophet annulled the marriage, demonstrating the inviolable nature of a woman's choice in selecting her spouse. This practice was revolutionary at the time, challenging the cultural norms where women were treated as commodities rather than individuals with rights. In Islamic teachings, marriage is built on principles of kindness and compassion. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, set the highest standard for how husbands should treat their wives. He said, "The best of you are those who are best to their wives, and I am the best among you to my wives." His conduct with his wives was exemplary. He helped with household chores, treated them with tenderness, and valued their opinions. His life serves as a model for all men, showing that true leadership in a household comes with humility and care. Financial independence is another significant right that Islam grants to women in marriage. A woman has complete autonomy over her wealth, whether it is inherited, earned, or gifted. Even after marriage, her husband has no right to her property unless she willingly gives it. This was a groundbreaking right at a time when women in many societies were deprived of financial independence. Moreover, the husband is obligated to provide for the family, including food, clothing, and shelter, regardless of his wife's financial status. This financial responsibility is a duty placed upon men, and a woman is not required to spend her own money on household expenses unless she chooses to do so. The concept of the mahr, or dowry, further demonstrates Islam's consideration for women's rights in marriage. The mahr is a mandatory gift from the husband to the wife, symbolizing his commitment and respect for her. It is her personal property, and she has the full right to use it as she pleases. This practice not only honors the bride, but also ensures that she begins her married life with financial security. Islam also places significant emphasis on emotional well-being in marriage. A husband is encouraged to communicate openly with his wife, share her joys and sorrows, and nurture a loving relationship. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, exemplified this in his interactions with his wives. He would consult them on important matters, value their perspectives, and ensure they felt cherished. His playful and affectionate nature with his wives, such as racing with Aisha, R.A., or using endearing names, highlights the importance of maintaining a joyful and respectful relationship. Divorce, while permitted in Islam, is considered a last resort and comes with guidelines to ensure fairness and dignity for both parties. If marital issues arise, Islam encourages reconciliation through family intervention and open communication. If these efforts fail, divorce can proceed in a manner that safeguards the rights of both individuals. A woman has the right to seek divorce, known as khula, if she feels the marriage is no longer sustainable. This demonstrates that Islam recognizes the importance of personal well-being and does not condone forcing individuals to remain in unhappy or harmful relationships. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Islamic marriage is the concept of polygamy. While Islam permits a man to marry up to 4 wives, it comes with stringent conditions. A man must treat all his wives with absolute fairness, providing them with equal financial support, time, and emotional care. The Quran explicitly states, "But if you fear that you will not be just, then marry only one." Surah An-Nisa 4:3. This verse underscores that monogamy is the default unless a man is confident in his ability to maintain justice. Polygamy was permitted to address specific social circumstances, such as providing care for widows and orphans in times of war, rather than being a blanket allowance for all men. The role of a wife in Islam is not confined to household duties. She is a partner in the truest sense, with the freedom to pursue education, work, and contribute to society. The example of Khadija, R.A., the Prophet Muhammad's first wife, is a testament to this. She was a successful businesswoman who supported the Prophet emotionally and financially. Her independence and leadership demonstrate that Islam values women's contributions beyond the home. Islam also recognizes the importance of mutual rights and responsibilities in marriage. Both spouses have rights over each other, fostering a balanced relationship. For example, while a wife has the right to financial support and kind treatment, a husband has the right to be respected and supported by his wife. This reciprocity ensures harmony and prevents exploitation on either side. Parenting is another critical aspect of marriage, and Islam encourages cooperation between spouses in raising children. Mothers are held in the highest regard, with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, stating, "Paradise lies at the feet of your mother." This reverence for motherhood reflects the significant role women play in shaping the next generation. At the same time, fathers are expected to provide not only financially, but also emotionally, setting an example of kindness and integrity for their children. In summary, Islamic teachings on marriage create a framework where both partners are empowered, respected, and supported. While cultural practices may sometimes deviate from these principles, the Quran and the Sunnah provide clear guidance for building a harmonious and fulfilling marital relationship. Cultural practices that conflict with Islamic principles have often led to widespread misunderstandings about the status of women in Islam. While Islam itself lays out clear guidelines for the rights and responsibilities of women, many communities have incorporated pre-existing customs and traditions that undermine these principles. This misuse of Islam is a key reason why people wrongly perceive the religion as oppressive to women. One major area where cultural practices diverge from Islamic teachings is in the issue of forced marriages. Islam categorically prohibits forcing a woman into marriage without her consent. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, annulled a marriage when a woman came to him and said she had been married off against her will, emphasizing that the consent of the bride is an essential condition for a valid Islamic marriage. Despite this, in certain communities, forced marriages continue to occur, and these actions are mistakenly attributed to Islamic teachings. Such practices stem from patriarchal traditions and a lack of proper understanding of Islamic principles, rather than the religion itself. Another significant issue is the denial of education to women. In many parts of the world, cultural norms prevent women from accessing education, perpetuating the cycle of ignorance and limiting their potential. This is in direct contradiction to the teachings of Islam. The Quran encourages all Muslims, both men and women, to seek knowledge, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, repeatedly emphasized the importance of education for everyone. One of his famous sayings is, "Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim." Historical examples of women in Islamic history, such as Aisha, R.A., Hafsa, R.A., and Fatima al-Fihri, illustrate how women played vital roles as scholars, educators, and leaders. Thus, the lack of education for women in some Muslim-majority communities reflects a cultural failure, not a religious one. Honor killings are another egregious practice often falsely associated with Islam. These heinous acts, carried out in the name of preserving family honor, have no basis in Islamic teachings. Islam holds human life as sacred and explicitly condemns murder. The Quran states, "Whoever kills a soul, unless for a soul or for corruption, done in the land, it is as if he had slain mankind entirely." Surah Al-Ma'idah 5:32. The use of religion to justify such crimes is a gross distortion of its teachings. Honor killings are rooted in tribal customs that predate Islam and have persisted due to a lack of proper religious education and enforcement of Islamic principles. The issue of domestic violence is another area where cultural practices often overshadow Islamic values. Islam strongly condemns all forms of oppression and abuse. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, set a clear example by treating his wives with kindness, respect, and compassion. He said, "The best of you are those who are best to their families, and I am the best among you to my family. Despite these clear teachings, domestic violence remains a problem in some Muslim communities, again reflecting cultural failings rather than the religion itself. Many imams and scholars today are working to educate communities about the Islamic stance on domestic violence. But more effort is needed to address this issue effectively. Another misconception arises from the practice of denying women their inheritance rights. The Quran explicitly outlines the shares of inheritance for both men and women in Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4. Women are entitled to inherit property, whether they are daughters, mothers, wives, or sisters. However, in many societies, women are pressured or outright denied their rightful share of inheritance, often under the guise of maintaining family unity or preserving wealth within the male lineage. Such practices are not only unjust, but also violate Islamic law. Denying women their inheritance is a grave sin in Islam, and those who engage in such behavior will be held accountable before Allah. Polygamy is another area often misunderstood and misrepresented. While Islam allows a man to marry up to 4 wives under specific conditions, it is not an unrestricted license. The Quran imposes stringent requirements, including the obligation to treat all wives equally in terms of financial support, time, and affection. The verse that permits polygamy, Surah An-Nisa 4:3, also cautions that if a man fears he cannot maintain justice between his wives, he should marry only one. This stipulation underscores the seriousness of the responsibility and indicates that polygamy is not a default or recommended practice, but a regulated allowance in certain circumstances, such as the care of widows and orphans during times of societal need. However, in some cultures, men misuse this allowance for personal desires, disregarding the Quranic injunctions and causing harm to women in the process. Misinterpretations of the hijab and modesty requirements have also fueled misconceptions about women's rights in Islam. The hijab is often portrayed as a tool of oppression, but in reality, it is a spiritual practice rooted in the Quran and Hadith. It reflects a woman's choice to express her faith and prioritize her inner character over external appearances. The Quran addresses both men and women when it speaks about modesty, making it clear that this principle applies equally to all believers. Unfortunately, in some societies, cultural norms have transformed the hijab into a symbol of control rather than an act of faith. Women may be forced to wear it against their will, which contradicts the Quranic principle that there is no compulsion in religion, Surah Al-Baqarah 2002-56. True Islamic teachings advocate for modesty as a mutual and voluntary act of devotion. The lack of opportunities for women to participate in public life in some Muslim-majority communities is also rooted in cultural traditions rather than Islamic principles. Women in Islamic history played prominent roles in governance, trade, and public service. For instance, Khadija, R.A., the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a successful businesswoman and a key supporter of the early Islamic mission. Other examples include female scholars, jurists, and leaders who contributed significantly to Islamic civilization. The sidelining of women in public roles in some modern contexts reflects cultural attitudes that contradict the empowerment Islam provides. In conclusion, the challenges faced by women in some Muslim communities are not the result of Islamic teachings, but rather the consequence of cultural practices, ignorance, and a failure to adhere to the principles of Islam. It is crucial to distinguish between religion and culture when addressing issues of women's rights. By returning to the Quran and the Sunnah, Muslims can reclaim the true spirit of justice, equality, and dignity that Islam envisions for women. This requires education, dialogue, and a collective effort to eradicate harmful cultural practices and uphold the rights that Islam has granted to women. Women's rights in Islam are a subject of great significance, often misunderstood or misrepresented by both critics and even some followers. The core teachings of Islam, as outlined in the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, present a revolutionary framework for women's dignity, empowerment, and equality. To fully understand this, one must separate the cultural practices prevalent in some Muslim-majority regions from the true Islamic principles that transcend time and culture. In Islam, women are recognized as individuals with inherent dignity and value, equal to men in the eyes of Allah. The Quran explicitly emphasizes this equality in matters of spirituality and accountability, stating, "Indeed, the Muslim men and Muslim women, the believing men and believing women, the obedient men and obedient women, the truthful men and truthful women, the patient men and patient women, the humble men and humble women, the charitable men and charitable women, the fasting men and fasting women, the men who guard their chastity and the women who do so, and the men who remember Allah often, and the women who do so. For them, Allah has prepared forgiveness and a great reward." Surah Al-Ahzab 33-35. This verse is a profound declaration of the equal potential and responsibilities that men and women share in their faith journey. Islam recognizes the full humanity of women, granting them rights and protections that were revolutionary for their time and continue to resonate with modern understandings of justice and equality. Before the advent of Islam, women in many societies, including pre-Islamic Arabia, were often denied basic human rights. They were considered property, with no right to inheritance, education, or autonomy. Female infanticide was widely practiced, a cruel reflection of the deep-seated bias against women. The Quran explicitly condemns this practice, and when the girl, who was buried alive, is asked for what sin she was killed, Surah At-Takwir 81:8-9. By abolishing such practices, Islam established a foundation for the dignity and value of women's lives. Islam also provided women with legal rights, unprecedented in its historical context. Women were given the right to own property, conduct business, and inherit wealth. These rights were unheard of in many societies of the 7th century and were only granted to women in the Western world centuries later. Inheritance laws outlined in the Quran ensure that women have a share in the wealth left behind by their parents, spouses, or relatives, as described in Surah An-Nisa 4:7. For men is a share of what the parents and close relatives leave, and for women is a share of what the parents and close relatives leave, be it little or much, an obligatory share. Education is another cornerstone of women's empowerment in Islam. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, emphasized the importance of knowledge for both men and women, declaring, "Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim." This inclusivity in the pursuit of knowledge is further exemplified by the role of women scholars in Islamic history. Aisha, R.A., the wife of the Prophet, was one of the most prominent narrators of hadith and a source of knowledge for both male and female companions. Her intellectual contributions continue to shape Islamic jurisprudence and ethics to this day. One of the most misunderstood aspects of women's rights in Islam is the concept of modesty and the wearing of the hijab. Critics often claim that the hijab is a symbol of oppression, but this narrative overlooks the profound significance of the hijab as a choice and an act of empowerment. The Quran advises modesty for both men and women. Tell the believing men to lower their gaze and guard their private parts. That is purer for them. Indeed, Allah is acquainted with what they do. And tell the believing women to lower their gaze and guard their private parts and not expose their adornment except that which necessarily appears thereof. Surah An-Nur 24:30-31. The hijab is not about subjugation, but about encouraging an environment where individuals are valued for their character and contributions rather than their physical appearance. Islamic teachings also address the rights and responsibilities of women within the family and society. In marriage, the relationship between spouses is based on mutual respect, compassion, and understanding. The Quran beautifully describes this relationship. They are clothing for you, and you are clothing for them. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:187. This metaphor highlights the intimacy, protection, and interdependence between spouses. Islam strictly prohibits any form of abuse or mistreatment, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, emphasized this, saying, The best of you are those who are best to their wives. Women also retain full financial independence in Islam. A woman's wealth remains her own, even after marriage, and she is under no obligation to spend it on her household unless she chooses to do so. The principles of justice, equality, and empowerment are deeply ingrained in Islamic teachings. However, the realities of cultural practices and societal norms in some Muslim-majority regions have often obscured these ideals. Practices such as forced marriages, denial of education, and honor killings are not Islamic, but are instead remnants of cultural traditions that predate Islam. As Muslims, it is our responsibility to differentiate between cultural practices and the true teachings of Islam, and to ensure that the rights granted by Allah are upheld. The contributions of Muslim women throughout history further challenge the narrative of oppression. From Khadija, R.A., the first wife of the Prophet and a successful businesswoman, to Fatima al-Fihri, who founded the first university in the world, Muslim women have been at the forefront of education, leadership, and social reform. Their legacy demonstrates the vast potential for women's empowerment within the framework of Islamic principles. While misunderstandings and misrepresentations of women's rights in Islam persist, it is crucial to approach the subject with an open mind and a willingness to explore the authentic teachings of the Quran and Sunnah. Women in Islam are not oppressed. They are empowered with rights, responsibilities, and opportunities that honor their dignity and humanity. The beauty of Islam lies in its balance, providing guidance that uplifts both men and women and fosters a society built on mutual respect, compassion, and justice. The empowerment of women in Islam is a testament to the divine wisdom of its teachings. Whether through the right to education, financial independence, or spiritual equality, Islam lays a foundation for women to thrive as active contributors to society. It is up to us, as individuals and communities, to uphold these principles and to challenge the stereotypes and injustices that obscure the truth. By returning to the authentic teachings of Islam, we can create a world where women's rights are not only protected, but celebrated as an integral part of a just and equitable society.